Hello and welcome to Truthiverse. This is Brendan D. Murphy, your host. We are on healthylife.net radio, and I'm joined this week by Christopher James, the man of the hour, who is going to enlighten us on many things law. And we are going to be talking about the unlawful conversion, the thing that very few people know about, and yet it happens to everyone when we are born. Let's not waste any time here. Christopher, I want to bring you in. Welcome to the show, my brother, firstly.
Thanks, Brendan, for having me.
It's fantastic to have you, and I completely support what you're doing here, which is obviously why I want to broadcast this message. Can you maybe give our audience a little bit of a background as to who you are and how the hell you ended up doing this?
Yeah, that's a good first question and a loaded one. I didn't plan on being here in this position. I'll give you a real short version of it. All my life, I've been driven from a very young age. I was involved in music, and I thought right from the very age of 13, very young, something was pulling me towards music. I always thought that was my path in life, that I was supposed to do something very huge in the music and entertainment industry. And then as my career and everything developed forward, I wound up becoming a recording engineer. I'm a musician by trade, a writer, producer, or writer, piano, and self-taught and drummer. And it went from my love for music that I was doing 24 hours a day as I became a recording engineer, and I worked professionally in the industry. And then once I got to that point, I realized and I saw this vision. Again, I'm really fast tracking here to 2001. When the internet came online in 95, I saw an enormous opportunity to do something that's never been done before in this world, not only within the music and entertainment industry, but actually bringing a financial mechanism forward, architecture that the world had never seen in real time. Because back then in 2001, maybe many people might not be able to remember back till then, or 2002, there was no YouTube and there was no Facebook back then. Okay, so I already understand a subscription model, and I created this incredible business model for the music and entertainment industry. And the long and the short of it was obviously very successful. I managed to have, again, it's not an I Love Me thing. Alan Lee from Lord of the Rings, who many people might know what those movies are, he was a conceptual artist, and he received all types of Grammys for it. He flew over specifically to see me in 2003 and ultimately ended up offering his services to me for free when he turned down Brad Pitt for the movie Troy. And I just say that, again, I'm condensing what's gone on here, because I went from the recording studios, then I went into general contracting, well, actually as a general laborer, just to make some money for the short term. And then that initiative wound up lasting 20 plus years. I became a full-fledged tradesman in all trades, and I became a general contractor, but I still understood where I was going with my music and entertainment industry. But the building side helped me to bring this global initiative. It was a $1.5 billion initiative launching in 10 countries. And I believe that this is what my calling in life was always for. And then in 2005, my entire life got, I guess you could say, changed when that curtain, that veil got pulled back, and I actually really saw for the first time what was going on in this world. And I had no idea, just like probably many people out there that are listening to me speak right now. The good thing is that many people since then have become awake to what is going on in this world. God bless the internet and its connectivity. So I went from there, from doing the general contracting into actually what happened is when my life's work got, I guess you could say, when I realized it was never going to come to fruition, because I came across this evil in this world. And that basically began with the Federal Reserve. Again, I'm a musician by heart. I eat, slept, and bred music. So what do musicians know about finance, right? We can't know everything. So that was an area that I was weak on. So as I started to research and look into this back in 2000, 2001, that's when I started coming across this very disturbing truth surrounding the central banks and how money was first created. Again, I had no idea of this larger truth that we're going to talk about here tonight, the trespass. So from there, in my life's work, I realized by 2004, 2005, it was never going to come to fruition. And that destroyed me. I was numb for a year, because I'd put everything, if people know Hold'em poker, I went all in. Okay, I was never married. I don't have any children, none that I know of. But because my life, I knew, would not allow me to have that type of time to spend that joy with the family and nurture and be in the right capacity for me to be there and a father figure if I had children. I was at least mature enough in that regards not to go down that road. I did want that in my life, but I knew at that particular time I couldn't have it. And then as a result of that, when I realized that my life's work was never going to come to fruition, and my work went to the highest levels in Canada here. I live in Canada. It went right up to the Prime Minister's office at the time, Paul Martin, twice. And many huge things that we can talk about once we get into the show, when you learn more about that background of that journey, occurred that were just incredible moments in my life. But ultimately, when I knew that my life's work was never going to come to fruition, I was numb for a year. I want everyone to know it's because my parents, my family, my sister, they all supported me financially to get this initiative off the ground. They had to borrow everything on their houses that were all mortgage free to help get this initial funding. And this is where the criminality started to creep into my life. Up until that point, being a general contractor, I'd never had a bounced check. I'd never had a problem, never been to court. I had a really decent life. My mother and father, they don't come from money or whatever, but they own their home. Same with my sister. And when they saw this initiative that I was trying to launch, the people I went to through the Royal Bank up here in Canada, they put me onto a guy named Dino DeLellis. And we can do a show on him alone sometime. But again, a long story short, this guy ended up lying to me. He ended up putting me in a position with my parents' house. Now they mortgaged everything to the hilt, and it destroyed our family financially. And when that happened, I vowed to get to the bottom to find out what was going on. And then what happened led after that is that a man that came in to help me with my initiative, which was Soulcore Entertainment Group, that was the $1.5 billion project launching worldwide in 10 countries. He came in on board, and this man was a past fire chief, but he was also a man that knew a great deal about land development, and he'd worked through and with the government many times in Canada up here. So he came to me, and we found this property, and again, and when all this stuff fell apart with what I was doing in the music and entertainment side, I went into commercial lending with him. He was a brilliant man. And that's where I got my feet wet and really starting to understand financing, but more importantly, seeing the enormous fraud that's going on out there. Okay, commercial lending is a huge thing. Okay, these people lie through their teeth like you wouldn't believe. It's far worse than just getting a mortgage, for your home or whatever. These people, they lie, they obfuscate. You see tons of accounting records. They're just lying at you it seems everywhere you went, people are lying. But what really stepped out into the light to me was the elderly people being completely destroyed by a lot of these nefarious people that are in these markets for, they'd be selling some type of great investment, sweet investment, and they'd just be stealing from these elderly people. They'd be having them put mortgages, again, like my mother and father did, on their homes when there was no mortgages there before, and then burdening them with all this debt. And then the elderly people would end up losing their home when these investments didn't come to fruition, right? And the police said, well, we have no recourse because there's such this gray area, Christopher, that these people that are doing these wrongful things to everyone are manipulating within the legal world. So I should also point out, too, that when I got into this commercial financing, again, because of all this fraud that came out towards me, I started becoming involved with the local police, federally, provincially, and locally, because not they were coming after me, but because of the cases that I was coming across and I was bringing to their attention. And then one of them managed to be a huge one that went down in the Ontario government, shall we say, history books that they got on the hook for. I don't want to say what the case was about, but it involved the mob, and it was hundreds of millions of dollars that they stuck the provincial government for. Well, these people were coming back and trying to launder their dirty money several years later into the system, and they happened to come to us to do this commercial lending. So that's when the RCMP over here in Canada, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that's when they contacted me, and then that's where my engagement started to happen with them. At one point, Brandon, one of the RCMP officers said to me, Chris, you're like a magnet for this stuff. And this is someone who'd been in the front lines of fraud for at least 20 years. It's not about me, but she says, all these cases that are around you, she says, it's just like you're a magnet for it. I guess you could say all these things were happening for a reason back then, and you don't really understand it until you're able to really, truly look back. And now I have been able to do that since all this is past and recognize that every single thing that was put in my path was put there for a reason. It was to prepare me for this moment that is here before us now that we're going to talk about. So I went from commercial lending, and then what happened was that my father, he brought to me a pension case that was his own pension that was involved in, and again, it was a corporation called Sara Lee. His company wound down in 1992, which was the Fuller Brush Company, and Sara Lee had bought Fuller Brush back in 72. So whenever a corporation buys another corporation, they inherit all their trust agreements. Real simple for everyone to understand for their pension plans and stuff. So fast forward, they bought them in 70-something, 75, I think it was. Fast forward to 92, Fuller Brush is closing down in Canada. Well, what was happening is supposed to happen is that Sara Lee was supposed to pay out the money that was in the pension fund at that time directly to all the employees that were left and be done with it, liquidate the company. Well, they didn't do that. They kept the money, and then they invested it, and then by, I think it was 1998, it rose to $17.5 million from about 1.2. And then my father gets a letter in 2006. Remember, Fuller Brush closed down in 92. He gets a letter in 2006 stating to him that there's this surplus that Sara Lee found, and they wish to share the surplus with them. God bless them. Wasn't that nice of them? They're willing to share the surplus with all these elderly employees. Most of them have died now that were owed this money from almost 20 years earlier, and yet they're offering this wonderful settlement, 50-50 sharing agreement. Well, long story short, the company had no right or title to it. That's my father brought me in 2010. He asked me to look at it. And by that time, I'd been doing a lot of, just I acquired these investigative skills because of what had happened with me in my personal career and then what had happened with the police. And then I started working with you. I just started to develop these traits. And I became like a warrior back then, fighting this system, trying to find out what the hell is going on in this world. And I finally got that truth. But ultimately what happened with my dad is that he had passed away before he saw a dime of any of his money that was owed to him. He was actually murdered in the hospital from what they did to him. And I believe that this was done, all the evidence points to, because the case that I was involved in him would have been one of the largest cases in Canadian history. It was $250 million civil class action lawsuit that was filed. I have all the paperwork that I can always show you and share with you so you can see it. But it was $240 million. There were 2 pension plans, 2 pension funds. And I went to a lawyer back then because we're talking about law tonight and people are going to learn the difference between legal and lawful. And I believed in the legal system then. I was still ignorant of it back in 2006, but I started to learn shortly after that. And ultimately what these lawyers did is that when my dad had passed away, died before he saw a penny of this money, they threw all the pensioners under a bus. They went back in and they stole hundreds of thousands of dollars more of money and fees in that. Nobody was held accountable. So on my father's deathbed, why I'm ultimately here today before everybody, and this isn't a sob story, this is the truth. I want people to understand this, that everything that I'm speaking to Brendan here about tonight is my truth. And much of it is also going to be our truth. Everything is fact-based that we're talking about here. These aren't opinions that we're talking about here tonight. So it's important that you understand when truth is present, and I'm not preaching to people here, but this is what I've learned, is that when truth is present, very few words are required, but you also must understand where that message, where that truth is coming from. And that's why you have to look at the man that you're looking at right now on camera, myself. And you not judge me, but do your vetting on me. Look into what I'm doing, follow my work, see what's going on. And eventually I think you will see very quickly that everything that I'm claiming is true. So when this happened, my father died and he never saw a penny of his money. And I made a promise to him on his deathbed that I would hold these people accountable that did this to him. And these were lawyers, these were judges, these were a top government agency in Canada here called FSCO, Financial Services Commission of Ontario. There's multiple people all within these corporations. So everybody at home there knows that, we see all this wrong and harm going on in this world. How do you hold these people accountable? That's what started questioning me, because I was seeing all around me, especially dealing in the fraud side and the commercial side with the police. The police are all telling me, we do all this investigative work, we put a case together, we hand it off to the Crown, and then maybe 50% of the time these people are, actually held accountable. Most of the time there's some legal thing that gets worked out at the end or God knows what. But at the end of the day, it was always frustrating the police. So for me, when I came on board, this was a personal issue for me to right a wrong that happened to my mother and father. Okay, because they believed in me, and my sister, and they gave everything that they had to see this initiative come to fruition. And when I wiped all them out, I carried that all these years, that financial stress, that, like I said, it's very emotional when you understand the depths of what happened to my family. And not a sob story, but this is why I'm here before everybody today. This is the truth that you need to understand, because it was through the love that I have for my mother and my father and sister, to see what happened to them, to right or wrong, to hold these people accountable for what they did properly and lawfully, that I came across this truth, that I uncovered this truth that we're going to talk about here tonight. So that's what brought me here to today. And then, after my father had passed away, I began drilling down on this, and that's 8 years ago now, or pardon me, 9 years ago. And so, I finally got the truth, I guess you could say, surrounding this unlawful conversion, this trespass that we're going to talk about here tonight that occurred. And once I got that truth, Brendan, it was about a little over a year ago, it lifted this enormous weight that I've been carrying off my shoulders. Because once you have the truth, you have it in your heart, your mind, and your soul, there's nobody that's going to be able to take you down in any capacity. Sure, they can take you out with a bullet, but if you have to get in a discussion with somebody, if you're fearful of something, the only reason you may have fear in this world, it's just simply because you lack the knowledge. And I've gone on an incredible journey that's allowed me to now bring this truth, this knowledge forward. It's through experiences, applied experiences, that we gain knowledge, okay? And through applied knowledge, that's where a man or woman gains wisdom. Okay, and I'm somewhere between the knowledge part. I tell you, when I got a PhD in failure, most people would probably turn off their radio now going, why do I want to listen to a guy that's failed so much? But believe me, what you're about to hear is the biggest truth that's ever been hidden from mankind in this world. And it happened to you when you were born. It happened to all of us. And why this is so important right now, and what Brendan and I are starting to do, is that you are not only going to learn of this truth, but you're going to see the solution moving forward to address this massive lie we have going on in this world surrounding COVID-19. Okay, it's going to put the power back in the hands of we the people like never before. And I just want to say in closing on this first little introduction to me, I would just like to say thank you to you, Brendan, for having me on the show, because it's people like you that once we get into this that are worth so much in this world right now, because you're a light bringing these truths forward. So let's get into it and let's help people understand what's going on.
Yeah, thank you for the acknowledgement there, mate. And yeah, it's absolutely not lost on me the magnitude of the situation that we're in, and you fully understand that. Without further ado, I mean, we should probably break down and really break it down as simply as possible, and hopefully with as much detail as possible. What is this very disturbing truth that you did find out over a year ago, and what is it that is happening to people when they're born? There's this trespass, this unlawful conversion. I know what it is, but I want you to explain it as you've discovered it and understood it and pulled it apart.
Quite simply, first I'll speak in common terms. Everybody knows in their heart right now that they're seeing around the world before this stuff came on with COVID that there's something wrong with the court systems. Right? Sure, we all laugh about, we say, oh, we don't laugh, but we say, oh, it's all corrupt. We know there's a lot of corruption going on, but most people don't get involved in it. Why? Because they never go to courts. They never have to go to courts. So you're going to actually understand what's going on in the public courthouses now, and you're going to understand the remedy to move it forward. So quite simply, it's this. When we are all born, lying moments only as a baby in a bed or a crib in a hospital, there's paperwork that's being created unbeknownst to us. Remember, you're a baby. You might be, consciously somewhat kind of here, but you have no comprehension to be able to understand any documentation or conversations or communications or especially contracts that are being created in behind you, unbeknownst to you. Well, that's what's actually happening when we're born. And that's the trespass that we're talking about against every man and woman in a hospital. When you're born, they create paperwork. Your mother and father are signing paperwork in the hospital, and they simply think that they're putting their child on the record, that this is when they came into this world and they were born. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is that this evil that is out there today in this world that's been here for a very, very long time, it has to kill the consciousness of man right from the moment we come into this world. And how they do that is on paper. Shortly after you're born, you realize that you receive in the mail a birth certificate, right? Everyone's received a birth certificate. Well, that birth certificate is evidence. And they say, what is it evidence of, Chris? It's evidence of identity theft, because that's the documentation that was part of being created when you were born. There's a hospital record that's filled out in the hospital, and they use that hospital record. I should have provided you with some visuals to show people, but they are up on my website, www.awarriorcalls.com. There's 4 foundational videos that are there. Everybody must watch them, okay? Because this will help you understand what Brendan and I are simply talking about here right now. So when you're born, this trespass occurs. There's paperwork that's being created. What does that paperwork represent? It represents the creation of a corporation, first and foremost, okay, in your name. It's also known as a legal person. Okay, remember, you weren't born as a legal person. We all come into this world as a man or woman. So at that moment, when that trespass occurs, who's creating this documentation, the birth certificate? Well, you think it's your government, but when you understand that all of our governments, and here's a key word, are service corporations. They're not here by and for we the people. This is the trick. You got to simply flick your mind over and realize that your government, whether it's at a municipal level, your city council, whatever, they're no different than Burger King and McDonald's. Okay? Are you under the control of Burger King and McDonald's? No. They're there providing services to us. That's how our governments are supposed to be working. They are employees of we the people. They provide us with services. They don't write laws. They don't write anything that governs our lives. We are free and independent as we were born. So again, that's basically what happens when you're born, is that a legal person is created, a corporation. The birth certificate has nothing to do with you. When you understand that document was sent to you, there's 2 dates on it. When you were born, but then there's a registration date. And it's that registration date, that's the date when a corporation, a legal person, was created. And who owns and controls that corporation that was created? Well, your government, right? The Service Corporation in Canada here, where I live, it's the provincial government of Ontario. They created that document, the birth certificate. They own it. It's like a franchise to them, but they don't tell you that. And what is bound to all their codes, rules, and statutes and regulations? Well, it's that franchise that they created when you were born, that legal person, that corporate entity, that ridiculous piece of paper. They don't own and control any man or woman. And this is when you start to understand the deceit that's gone on. And then you start to realize that lawyers, all they can do is represent, not represent. They represent a man or woman as what? As that legal person in their legal system. So when you go into a court, that's what they're doing. They're presenting you as that piece of paper that the service corporation, your government created, that has control over, because he who creates owns and controls. So people need to start seeing the wheels turning here. That is this what's happened when we're born? Exactly. This is why we're not seeing the rights that a man or woman is afforded when we go into these public courthouses, because you're not seen as a man or a woman. You're seen as this creation, this property, which is owned and controlled. Again, it's a fiction on paper, but they cloak you, they deceive you, they fool you to thinking that you are this all caps name, that you are this entity that's on their paperwork. This is the key. Go look at all the legal filings anywhere in the world. You're always going to see at the top of that filing, whoever the parties are, if it's traffic court or whatever, you're going to see your name or the other people's names all in capital letters. And that's why the world of legal only applies to that which is incorporated, and lawful applies to that which is unincorporated, which is a man or woman or people. You are never a person. A person is a legal term. A person has the same terminology as a corporation. So as we come into this world, we're talking about law here, and ultimately why I'm here this evening is that my fellow man doesn't understand the power that we have in law. Okay, we talked a second ago about legal and lawful. Legal only applies to that which is incorporated, okay? Remember that. Legal is the world of the dead. It only exists on paper. Lawful applies to a man or a woman, people. And we are not persons that we spoke to about earlier. So another thing you need to understand is that the word law is very powerful. People are not taught this, including lawyers. It's not just a pretty word. Law actually stands for another very powerful word, which is called jurisdiction. There's a handful of core words that people need to really understand and master. And the first three core words is trespass, property, and who. You'll hear me speak to these words quite a bit, but the only reason you use the word trespass is because any wrong or harm that occurs to any man or woman in this world, it's a trespass. If it's a breach of contract, if they've damaged your property, if they've burnt your house down to the ground, if they've assaulted you or whatever, it's a trespass. And then you define what that trespass is after that word, like, fraud, theft, whatever that trespass has occurred against you. And then the word property, well, property includes everything that's exclusive to you. Your rights fall under the word property. Okay, it's not just your physical things like your home, your cars, your boats, your material things. It's anything that is exclusive to you. So, for example, when you get married, that is supposed to be, there's different relationships in our world today, but in the purest sense of the word, when you get married, is that man and woman, they are exclusive to each other. Okay, you are each other's property. And that it's very powerful when you understand that. And for people that are dealing with any child issues with child protection services, this is where this word property comes in to protect them. You never refer to your children as children. They're your property. And you simply demand of these people, I require for someone to provide, your evidence that you have the right to administrate property without right when you're dealing with children. So it's a whole other show that we can get into, but those three words are very powerful. Trespass, property, and who. You will see me and hear from me use these words frequently as I speak. And it's important that you listen to how I speak at times, because the words that we use are powerful. And when you understand what these words mean in their totality, you are lethal against this corruption around us, because nobody can administrate property without right. And unless a man or woman comes forward and claims that you're property, then none of this paperwork that they're putting in front of us, even though that's all based on fraud, as we'll get into, applies to you. Remember, if someone comes up to you and they're pushing a piece of paper in front of you and saying that some code, rules, or statute or regulation applies to you, that what we've all been conditioned to, what we've all been born into in this world, to believe that legal applies to a man or woman. And now everyone's hearing for the first time, uh-oh, what do you mean legal? And when they really get that, they go, uh-oh. So then people are going to say, well, wait a second, Chris, wait a second. If legal doesn't apply to a man or woman, see their brains start going, and they go, then why are these lawyers that operate in legal proceedings, how are they getting control over us or working with us in these public courthouses? Well, now you understand the fraud that's going on here. You see, lawyers don't represent people. You got to look at the word. They represent people. And then they say to me, Chris, well, what are they representing me as? Now you know. They're representing you as that creation that occurred unbeknownst to you as a child on paper. that corporation that was created. That's what the lawyers represent. That's the only thing that they can represent, because they're also agents or officers of these service corporations, right? That's within their jurisdiction. That means control. And I apologize, I went off that word jurisdiction. Jurisdiction means control, but it also means something else that's very powerful. The word law stands for the three jurisdictions in our world: land, air, and water. And that's huge once you understand it. See, the minute something is incorporated, okay, it becomes a legal entity. It's dragged out to the jurisdiction of the sea. That's where their world, their realm works. That's why lawyers, ask any lawyer, are you trained in admiralty, maritime law? And they're going to say, absolutely. Ask them where the word man or woman appears in any of their precious law books. Doesn't appear. And there's a reason for that, because their so-called law, remember, they're a private society, which you and I do not belong to. So if you and I had a private society, Brandon, of millions of people, we could write our own rules, especially our rules of civil procedure, which they write and create for their own processes that go on in these public courthouses. But they can put any name to any term, and they can define it how they see fit, because it's a private society. And when you get brought into their private society in our public courthouses, and you're moving through one of their legal processes, that's where they're having a field day with our fellow man, because our fellow man doesn't have a clue what's actually going on. He doesn't realize that these people have jurisdiction only over that creation that was created when we were born, that piece of paper. They don't have any jurisdiction, control over a man or woman. So the three letters in law: land, air, water. The jurisdiction of the land, that's where you and I stand. That's where you and I walk. That's where all the people are, the majority of us are born. We're born on the land. So it's the law of the land. It's the common law, the law that's unwritten. And that law comes from the Ten Commandments. That's from our Creator, right? It basically says you do no wrong or harm to your fellow man or woman, and you do not what? Trespass. See, that word's in the Bible. You never trespass against your fellow man or woman. You never cause them wrong or harm. Okay, because if you do, you're going to be held accountable for it. And that's the basis of law, not legal. So anytime someone starts talking to you about legal, just tune it right out, because it has nothing to do with you. And the bar is very scared about these truths that are coming out right now. And as I say to everyone, you must understand that as Brendan and I get further into these conversations, and you get more of a depth of an understanding, really drilling down on some of these things that are occurring in the courthouse or outside of the courthouse, from traffic stops and everything, I want to explain and be very clear to everybody about a truth, a foundational truth surrounding all of those interactions that we're going to discuss. Is that everybody in this world's been lied to, Brendan. Not just me and you, everybody. People that are acting as doctors, police, yes, even some judges, right? The ones that are higher up in the judicial system that's out there today, they know this stuff, okay? They're aware of what's going on, and it's their job to keep the sheep, right, in their pen. They can't let one of us get out of it, because if one of us gets out and tells the rest of them, it's game over, their gig's up. And that's what ultimately is about to happen in our world right now with the bar. But the big thing why this truth is so powerful is with this COVID-19 that we've got going on right now, the lies that are all surrounding it, from the Judy Mikovich, which I've got an interview coming out in a few weeks that's going to blow the doors off all the other interviews that have happened to date. Not because I did it, but because of the information that's going to be finally brought out into the light, along with everyone now is going to understand the difference between legal and lawful. And they're going to understand why Judy Mikovich, who's been going through all these legal processes, has never, through after 8 lawyers, I think she said, has never been able to place this evidence into a public record for the people to see in the world. Because once everybody sees this truth, these records come into a courthouse, that's where it's supposed to belong. You know, we don't have these arguments and these communications like the mainstream media does outside of a public courthouse. This is very serious what's going on in this world right now, and there's an enormous amount of disinformation, lies, and deceit. And the only way we're going to wipe all of this out is at that public courthouse with a public hearing, a court moving under common law, where the world can see the evidence is laid bare and presented and prosecuted in real time. And when Judy brings this stuff out into the light, that's our goal in the next 4 or 5 months here. That is going to be the game changer for the world, because everyone's going to understand now that we're actually restoring our public courthouses to common law, and that the bar, this society that we do not belong to, Brendan, is never going to harm another man or woman again. It's huge. This truth's time has come. Okay, I have my website, warriorcalls.com. That's the place that I ask everybody to go to and subscribe immediately. Hopefully you can put that link up for people to find Brendan on your show. That would be much appreciated. That is my local, and you know, it's for the world to come to, but my global point of this spear of this truth is at earthunited.global. Okay, that is where the entire world is now coming under one hood. All these incredible organizations around the world that have been fighting 5G and all these other various things, vaccinations, all of it is coming under one hood now because of this truth that Brendan and I are talking about here this evening. Because it is so powerful, this is going to create the hard reset that we require in our public courthouses. And when that happens, it's going to restore not only the rule of law, but it's going to expose all this corruption and theater that's going on, that these people that are acting for these service corporations, making all these demands on us, from masks to vaccines or whatever, not to mention the truth gets brought out surrounding it, it's all based on fraud and lies. All of this stuff is going to stop. It's going to be a complete new reset in our world for how we the people actually have a government that is by the people, for the people, and of the people. So getting back to what we talked about, let's just talk in a common sense again. You came into this world, and let's just take the government out of there for a second, and let's put McDonald's there, okay? You come into this world, and McDonald's has your mother and father filling out paperwork that you think's all records and that, but meanwhile, McDonald's is creating a corporation, a franchise at which they're going to control and own in their system. In order for them to apply that to you, they've got to trick you and your parents. They've got to let you think that that is you from this paperwork that we created. So just imagine when you were born after a few weeks later, and that's why I say go look at the birth certificate that you were given. It's not yours. It's not your property. It's evidence of identity theft. It's evidence of a crime that's been committed against all of us, a trespass when we were born. The two things that are most important on that birth certificate, again, you didn't create it, so it's got nothing to do with you. It's evidence. But if you look at it, there's two important things on it. First is the day that you were born. You'll see that your date that you're born on, but there's a second date, and that's a registration date, as we talked about. So these are the things you can start to look at. This is why it's so powerful, Brendan, because every man and woman has this evidence at home. We all have it. So from that birth certificate, that's where they went and created the driver's license, the health card, your SIN number, all these different government's IDs, and they're all different corporations. Go and pull them all out and look at how the styling is of your name. You're going to see maybe your last name first, or maybe they'll just put the middle initial instead of the full name for your middle name, or the first name in all its glory, and then just a last name, no middle initial. They change it up every time, but ultimately that's a new corporation that's being created in the system unbeknownst to you. So when you come into this world and this trespass occurs against you, this documentation, now you're going to understand why it's so disturbing and why it's this massive, colossal, constructive fraud. Because what did all of us do when we've gone and bought a house, a car, a boat, a property, a land, whatever we've done? What identification did we use when we purchased that? We used the ID that we got from the government, didn't we? We used that birth certificate. Well, that birth certificate, now you've put on title that which you didn't create. So you've put, the government of, in my case, the government of Ontario, they created the corporation, Christopher James, and my last name, whatever. That is what on title for the property, trucks, cars, whatever you have. So this is how the people own nothing. Right? We're paying for all of this stuff, but it's a sleight of hand. This is how they've manipulated and fooled everybody. Go look at the bank account, right? The bank account's the big one. You go look at your bank account, and it's not yours. You've opened up a bank account, and you've put what? You've used the government's idea of the entity that they created when you were born on title. That's how these service corporations can come into a bank and close your bank account down, or they can take money out of it because it's not your account. Okay, and I have the proof of this on my website with the Maneri family. It's a long case, we won't get into it, but bottom line short is they were dealing with 3 banks, and once they had made their custom ID, which you also learn to make on my website, once they had their custom ID made, I had them go to the bank and correct the record, right? Because all of us are experiencing fraud here, colossal fraud, when you understand everything has the wrong title on it. And everything is being taxation and taken from us because of this unlawful conversion that happens when we're born. If you have the correct title on there, this system can't come in and touch your property. See how it comes back to that word? But that title, that birth certificate's not your property. There's a red number usually on it called the CUSIP number, which you learn about. That's required for any corporation or company that is bought or sold on the stock exchange. Right? That's on every birth certificate. So when you start to understand these truths, again, it's all eloquently laid out on my website, you start to see this enormous trespass that happened when we're born. And we got to drill down on that, Brendan, when we're born. That's the most important time. When we're born, you understand now that there's paperwork that's created unbeknownst to you. If I showed up at your door and I was handing you paperwork, if I worked for McDonald's and you owe me income tax for this year and you got to tell me how much you made or this and that, you're going to look at me if you've never met me before and the paperwork, and you're going to tell me, well, who the hell are you? I've never seen you before. That piece of paper, well, so what? You got my name on it. I don't know what you're talking about there. My wet signature's not there. There's no contract that's occurred between me and you. So who are you? It's the same thing for like in Canada here, the CRA. They're coming after taxation that is owed by that service corporation that they created, that franchise. But you've been led to believe that you're this franchise because you've used their titles on your bank accounts, your cars, your property. So this has been ingrained into everybody. So that's why you must learn who you are not before you can learn who you are. And this is what you understand, because this paperwork is crucial. It's the foundational trespass, and it affects everything through our financing, how money's created. It affects our justice system. It affects how all our properties are being administrated, so to speak. We all think that we own it, and we don't. And this is why the system that's out there is like an enormous parasite that's feeding off of my fellow man, because they are simply, you're not ignorant, you're not dumb, you were never shown this truth. And when I learned this truth, when I finally came through all the court system, to seeing when you enter that court in the correct capacity as the man or woman, not under this legal fiction that they've created, that courthouse is scared shitless, pardon my language, when you get in there. And if you can stand on your square, so to speak, and know how to do that, their court system falls apart very quickly. They want you out of that courtroom, and they don't want other people hearing what you're saying as truth. So that's the first step that we're talking about here tonight, is for people to start going, look at the documentation you were given shortly after you were born, start realizing that there's a hospital record that exists, that it's simply a record. It doesn't bind you to anything, but everything that was created after that has been used in a form of constructive fraud to act against the people worldwide and steal from them, from taxation, from their actual property. It's horrific once you understand it, but the solution to correct it is also very simple. It goes back to, we correct that unlawful trespass, we have the correct ID, then we go and correct all our titles on our property. More importantly, we access this public courthouse and we restore the law, the public law, which is, common law, into our public courthouses. And the legal world will be relegated to some small part of this courthouse now, where they do their contract law, which that's what the legal world's here for. That's what, we need lawyers for big commercial contracts and stuff. I don't pretend to know that stuff. That's what they're for. But they're not allowed to come over across the grain, so to speak, into the world of man.
We've covered some of the basics here, and I'd like, if we can, to jump into how this shakes out in terms of looking forward to solutions. What are our strategies here moving forward? And I know, Christopher, you've got a pretty epic plan, which I would like people to start finding out about for sure.
Yes, I'll definitely talk about that. But there's one thing I forgot to mention, Brendan, we were talking earlier. We went from the trespass that occurs from us when we're born, and then we didn't really talk about the unlawful conversion. What is happening is that when you're born in this world, you're a man or woman, you're one of the people, right? And immediately the system, let's talk about who created this system. We didn't touch on that. This system's been in place for thousands of years, but mankind hasn't known about it. It's morphed through the years. If you go to any of my Thursday night live streams, there's on the last week that I did on August the 20th, in the description, you're going to see, in the last two descriptions, you're going to see a PDF document there from Anna von Reitz's site that gives you the history. It's called the baby slave trade, because that's ultimately what's happening when we're born, is that the central bankers with the Pope and the Queen, they created this system a very long time ago. And as it changed, as the centuries unfolded, once we got to the early 1920s, 30s, they realized they had to switch it up again. And that's when they ushered in all these birth certificates, okay? All the stuff came out worldwide at that time. And this was all, again, pushed out through the central banks with the monarch, the Queen, and the Pope. They're the three heads of the snake that control this. When you get right into it, the Pope has created one corporation, and it's called the Crown, okay? It's the Crown Corporation, and that Crown Corporation owns and controls all corporations. So how they had to do a sleight of hand, this is how they control everybody, because they kill you at birth on paper, right? They don't physically kill you, but they kill you on paper and create that legal person, that fiction, that what? Corporation. And what did I just say 2 seconds ago? The Pope, through his papal bulls, declared many years ago, I think it's 1024 that he does. Don't quote me on it, but it's back there. I've got it in my records. And again, this is the rabbit holes that people don't have to go down, because we're in the here and now right now, but it's important that you understand how we got to this part. And more importantly, that leads you to understanding the solution moving forward. So that unlawful conversion is very important, because they're taking you from a lawful world to a legal world with the paperwork. See how that works? And that's why everybody understands a legal proceeding does not apply to any man or woman. So getting to the solution, I know we're fast tracking, we're moving through things here. When you understand who you are, when you understand the trespass that's occurred against all of us now, it's very simple to understand once you start to look at this documentation and then start to look at how you have operated in your life all this time, right? You'll start looking at the titles on your property. So where the remedy and the solution is, first and foremost, we have to correct the record, okay? This is under the circumstance, Brandon, if we didn't have this COVID-19 thing going on right now, right? But this is ultimately why everything happens for a reason in this world. All our courthouses are corrupted here in Canada, no different than anywhere else around the world. My goal was to reset, to do a hard reset in the courthouses and bring the common law forward, and that was just to wipe out all this corruption, etc. But then this COVID thing came along in November, December of last year, and I, like many researchers that have been doing it for 20 years, realized that this is something far worse. It gave me the shivers when they did it, because it was this evil pulling back the curtain once and for all, and now they're going for it. So they brought this fear forward into the world, all based on a lie. They've shut down the economies. That's the big tsunami that's coming right now. That's the part that's terrorizing, and they've engineered all this, and they're going to try fall back on it. Well, we did all this to protect the people because of the coronavirus, but all of this was a deceit. All of this was a foundational lie. This is what the world is going to learn, not my opinion. Facts, and you're going to hear from the very doctors that work directly with Fauci and know all of the patents that they've done. It's a huge thing. So when people look at this, they say, well, how are we supposed to get remedy in this? Where are we supposed to get the solution? And it's really simple. In the legal world, you cannot hold a policeman, a judge, a doctor, a politician, a carpenter, whatever, right? Do you notice the words I use there? They were all fictions. They were all capacities in which a man or a woman acts. I should say this first. The second that a man or woman acts in any other capacity as a man or woman, you do not have any rights. Okay, for example, when a police officer is acting, when that man or woman are acting in that honorable role, they don't have any rights. What do they have? They have duties and obligations. They're required in their job, in their corporate structure as an agent officer of that corporation. They've got duties and obligations. And those duties and obligations do not trump the rights of a man or woman. That's fact. See, so that right there is remedy for people starting to understand things. Because when you're being pulled over for a traffic violation or all these other things, they're under the presumption that you're operating under a license first and foremost. And everybody listening to this, you need to understand a very foundational truth. When you come into this world, you are granted full domain over this earth from our Creator. It's in Genesis. Read it. And that means that you're sovereign. That means that you have control over the land, the air, and the water, that we all have a duty to each other to respect it, to honor it, and protect it for future generations. But we are here free. We're born free in this world, which means we can roam this land freely. We can do whatever we want. We can engage and contract with whoever we wish and who we want, but we cannot do what? We cannot trespass against our fellow man and woman in whatever role or whatever capacity we're acting. It's that simple. And if we trespass against them and we cause them wrong or harm, then we're liable. Okay? That's what the law of the land is. It's the law that's unwritten. Lawyers are taught that common law is case law. So when you hear the word common law, I don't live where you live, Brendan, in Australia there, and the wonderful people of Australia, they may have some things that are common to them that aren't quite common to people in Canada here, right? But we still have that foundational truth of when we came into this world, that we are all born equal under the law. You always hear that, right? If there's going to be any judgment that comes placed upon us, that is supposed to come from a jury of our peers, right? Our fellow man and woman sitting on a jury, be it a 12-man jury or grand jury of 25, not some man who's wearing a robe, who works for a service corporation, right, who has duties and obligations to that private society is also part of the bar. That man is not a judge of any man or woman. He only has jurisdiction control over that legal fiction that was created because he works for the very same service corporation that created that legal fiction. See how simple that is to understand? So when I go into a courthouse, I always say I use the word require. I require, that means a nice word of saying demand, I require the name for my records when I'm speaking to any man or woman that's wearing the black robes. And they give me their name. Some of them try and get cocky. The odd time they say I'm Judge such and so ever, but most of them don't. Most of them say I'm John Smith or Betty Sue, right? And once I get their name, I say thank you very much. And then I speak to them like I'm speaking to you, Brandon, from this point on. I say, listen, John, we've got a false presumption here before the court. And that's how you address. That's the key thing that everybody, what you can simply tell them about remedy is you attack jurisdiction. Because now everybody should understand something. The legal world is operating under the jurisdiction of what? The sea, water. All right? The law of the water doesn't apply to the law of the land, does it? No. So you would challenge jurisdiction because their legal proceedings are all operating under the jurisdiction of the sea. Admiralty law. It's the law of the dead. It's the law of corporations incorporated. Well, you're walking in there as a man, right? You're on the land here. That court, you can't have two jurisdictions in the same court. That's like having a hockey team on one side and a baseball team on another. And then what the judge has got to do is he's got to ignore that baseball team's there and he's got to make them think that they're a hockey team. That's the whole role of the judge, because they don't want them to know that what is actually going on here, this theater that's being performed in front of you, is all based on this constructive fraud, this trespass, this unlawful conversion that happens against us when we're born. And this truth is huge. It's huge, Brendan, because this goes to the very foundation of all this deceit and wrong and harm. This is what the evil central bankers have been relying upon for the last 100 years, for destroying and taking so much wealth from every single nation. And that's why people need to understand why this is so powerful. It's going to bring into the light, once we restore our public courthouse to the common law, every man and woman will be able to go and hold the name of the man or woman that's prime minister or acting for that service corporation. Remember, they're not your government, but who's ever acting at the head of that service corporation, who's ever the head of that legal department, the attorney general, who's ever the head of that department under health that's been putting forth all these lies and deceit for you, those are the people that we're going to bring into court. And those are the people that are going to be held liable because they're committing treason against their fellow man. It's that simple. They have to be able to present the evidence showing why they had the right, first and foremost, to tell people to order them to stay home. They don't have that right. Remember, they're no different than McDonald's. They just have a different name on them, the government of Australia or the government of Ontario or whatever. It's the same corporation. It's the same type of legal structure. And you have to understand, if the president of McDonald's or Burger King told you all to stay at home, and then he sent his officers around in their cute little McDonald's or Burger King outfits, and they're handing out, tax forms, and they're trying to give you fines for coming out of your home, don't you think everybody in this world would laugh their heads off at that? You wouldn't take any of that serious. Well, it's the exact same foundational truth that's happening now with these service corporations acting as our governments. So the remedy is know who you are, understand this law that we're going to get into here, and when you access that public courthouse correctly, which we have to do now en masse, that's going to be the game changer as we move forward. I'm here because we have an enormous truth that's being hidden from our world right now. And this truth is so huge, as we've talked about tonight. It is going to take care of this COVID lie, and it's going to restore our world to a place of freedom that mankind has never had. We need right now, every man and woman hearing my voice, you need to go to warriorcalls.com and subscribe, and also to Earth United. It gets you in our database, and this is going to allow us, if they take the internet down or do any disruption, we're going to be able to keep this truth coming to you, because we've got a massive global action coming in October, November, where we need the world to go to all our public courthouses, and what you've learned here tonight is going to be applied to seek the remedy and the justice we've all been waiting for.
There you go, ladies and gents. That is a great send-off, a very compelling teaser kind of send-off. And I want to thank Christopher James for joining us for this episode and for the next episode, which he will be joining us on, ladies and gents. This has been Truthiverse with Brendan D. Murphy and Christopher James, our special guest this week on healthylife.net radio. Thanks for joining us. Tune in again next week, and we will kick off exactly where we left off and smash this fraud to pieces. See you then.